Overseeing Ohio's elections, ahead on Face the State, the race for Secretary of State.
I believe that the Secretary of State should be the state's #1 advocate for voters.
We've lost trust in each other as the people of the United States and in our institutions. And my mission and my goal is to run the most secure elections in the history of the state of Ohio.
One-on-one with the major party candidates for Secretary of State. Democratic State Representative Allison Russo and Republican State Treasurer Robert Sprague sit down for interviews you'll see only on 10, where they stand on the big issues affecting your vote. Plus, what did you do today?
Well, we filed to run for governor as write-in candidates for the general election.
Back in the race, the candidate for governor who got disqualified from the Republican primary after her running mate withdrew from the ticket is now running as a write-in. Why Heather Hill keeps pushing forward after the setback. Face the State starts now. Thanks for joining us for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. Today we're focusing on one of the key races in the November general election. Much of the spotlight has fallen on the races for governor between Republican Vivek Ramaswamy and Democrat Dr. Amy Acton, and U.S. Senate between former Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown and Republican Senator Jon Husted. But all 4 statewide offices are also up for election, one of those being the race for Secretary of State. This past week, the race literally took center stage at the Secretary of State's annual conference. The candidates, Democratic State Representative Allison Russo and Republican State Treasurer Robert Sprague, addressed a crowd of about 600 election officials from all 88 counties. I had the honor of moderating the discussions with each candidate. We focused on election integrity, security, and accuracy, protecting the voting process and voter access to cast a ballot. On stage, we also hit on some of the key issues of the day, including voter photo ID, ballot drop boxes, early voting, and more. Then, each candidate sat down with me backstage for one-on-one interviews on those same topics. I asked them both the same basic questions. You'll hear in depth from both of them today, starting with Democratic candidate, State Representative Allison Russo. Why do you want to be Secretary of State? Why are you running for this office?
Well, I believe that the Secretary of State should be the state's #1 advocate for voters. I always tell people, really, this office should not be a partisan office. It doesn't matter who people vote for, what issues they support or don't support. The Secretary of State's job is to advocate to make sure that every vote is counted, that voters' voices are heard, and that the information that they see when they go into the voting booth is accurate and it is unbiased.
Do you feel that Ohio's elections are secure and accurate?
Yes, I do. I feel that we have very secure and accurate elections, and it's mostly due to the hard work of our elections officials in every single county, both Republicans and Democrats. We have a fantastic process that has many checks and balances to it, and we really should not be making that more difficult for eligible voters.
But would you make any changes to the system to potentially make it more secure?
Well, I think #1, we have secure elections. I think, one of the jobs of the Secretary of State should be to increase the transparency in the process. I think there are a lot of unknowns that the public doesn't know about what are the checks in the process, and that people feel more confident. So I certainly think the Secretary of State has a huge role to play in that. When I think about how do we modernize our election process, it's how do we make certain aspects more convenient for voters, bring us into the 21st century. There are lots of opportunities, I think, to do that through the Secretary of State's office.
Right now there's a joint resolution calling for a constitutional amendment to be put on the November ballot that would ask voters if they want to require photo ID for voting in the state constitution. Where do you stand on that resolution?
Yeah, well, let me be clear about this. Voter ID has been the law of Ohio for decades. The current form of photo ID that we have has been the law for 2 years. So this is already existing state law. I think that this constitutional amendment effort is political. and it's meant to distract from the work that is not being done at the State House right now. You know, we're going to be in session for 2 more days. We're not addressing things like cost of living. We're not addressing things like how do we lower people's utility bills, address these rising healthcare costs. Instead, we're spending time and resources to put forward a constitutional amendment that is already state law. The issue and questions that I have with the current form of the amendment is it does not actually include some of the protections that we do currently have in state law. So for example, making sure that voters have access to a no-fee state ID, making sure that voters can actually correct their provisional ballot within 4 days, making sure that in the future, if we have more secure and accurate forms of identification, that we would be able to modernize our elections to reflect that. That is not in the current amendment, and you know, my hope is that it gets changes because those are huge concerns.
Do you have concerns about non-U.S. citizens voting? And if so, what would you change or tighten up to make sure that non-citizens aren't voting?
Well, again, to be clear, non-citizens are not allowed by law, and that has been existing law, to vote in our elections. Do I think that there is widespread voter fraud or non-citizens voting in our elections? I do not. The data simply does not support that. No one has been able to bring forward evidence of that. Do I think that we need checks in our system to ensure that only U.S. citizens are voting? Yes, we have that. We've had that for decades. And you know, but I think that continuing to spread this false narrative that there is widespread voter fraud, which in fact creates more hurdles for eligible U.S. Ohio voters to have their vote counted, is problematic.
On this topic, Ohio recently provided statewide voter registration data to the Department of Justice as part of a federal review of voter registration records. If you had been Secretary of State, would you have allowed the transfer of that information and supported that? And what would you push back on the federal government in terms of sharing if you were to become Secretary of State?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me answer that. No, I would not have handed over non-public, private data, voting data to the Department of Justice. There have been 6 federal court rulings on cases, states that refuse, Republican and Democratic states that refuse to hand over that data. Federal judges, Republicans and democratically appointed, have affirmed that states do not have to hand that information over. So I think that it was wrong of our current Secretary of State to do that. I think it creates a huge risk for the privacy of individuals' information. You know, do we have a process that actually checks our voter registration information against federal data sets? Yes, but that is very different than handing over 8 million plus records to the Department of Justice with absolutely no information and how they are going to protect that data, how they are going to be using that data, who else they are going to be sharing that data with. And I think many Ohioans across the political spectrum are deeply concerned about that, and I think that it was wrong to do it.
Where do you stand on absentee ballots, ballot boxes, and in-person voting? Would you change anything with that?
Well, I think that Ohioans, again, across the political spectrum, enjoy access to no excuse early voting options, including mail-in voting, ballot drop boxes, early in-person voting. It is working. People like to use it. It certainly helps in terms of staffing of our polling locations on Election Day. There is zero evidence that fraud exists in any of those early voting methods, and I intend to do everything that I can to protect that access for eligible voters.
So you don't feel that ballot boxes present an opportunity for fraud or for ballot harvesting?
No, and listen, my opponent in this race opposes ballot boxes, ballot drop boxes, and wants to get rid of them. I think that that is a huge mistake. I think that is not supported by the general public. They are absolutely secure. I suggest that he go talk with some of our election officials at our boards of elections to understand how they are secure. They are monitored. They can only be accessed with both a Republican and a Democrat using a key to open them. And I think any narrative to the contrary of that is both irresponsible and inaccurate.
Like we did out there, I want to do a little bit of the rapid fire
Sure.
thing. You don't have to give the one-word answer if you want to
Okay,
add a little bit of explanation to these, but I'd like it to be a little quicker. First of all, same-day voter registration. Do you support or oppose that?
I support that. Again, I view voting as a right. And the reality is many people are not paying attention until shortly before an election. It has worked in many other states, and I think that we have the capacity to do it and should do it.
We touched on it, but support or oppose ballot drop boxes.
Absolutely support ballot drop boxes.
Photo ID for absentee voting by mail.
I oppose the current proposal, which is to provide a photocopy in the mail of a photo ID. I think it presents huge hurdles, especially for older Ohioans and disabled Ohioans who don't have access to a scanner or copying machine.
Online absentee ballot requests.
I absolutely support the ability to request those online. It is shocking that here in the state of Ohio, we have not moved forward with that.
And finally, Election Day as a state holiday.
Absolutely support that. I think it's a great idea. In fact, I've co-sponsored legislation to make Election Day a holiday.
Representative Russo is serving her 4th term in the Ohio House of Representatives. She served as minority leader from 2022 to 2025. Coming up next, we step across the aisle in the race for Secretary of State. State Treasurer Robert Sprague has his eyes set on the office and has the platform he believes will get him there. His stance is on the key election issues of the day, from voter ID to ballot drop boxes and more. Welcome back to Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. Today we're focusing on the race for Ohio's Secretary of State. We just heard from Democratic candidate, State Representative Allison Russo. Now it's time to hear from Republican candidate, State Treasurer Robert Sprague. I asked both candidates in one-on-one interviews the same basic questions about why they are running and their stances on key election issues. Here's my interview with Treasurer Sprague. Well, first of all, Treasurer Sprague, just why do you want to be Secretary of State?
I want to be Secretary of State in order to run secure elections. We've lost trust in each other as the people of the United States and in our institutions. And my mission and my goal is to run the most secure elections in the history of the state of Ohio. And I have a unique set of skills and experiences as a leader that will let me do that job for the people of the state of Ohio. And so I'm running to sustain our republic.
Do you believe that Ohio's elections are secure and accurate?
Yes, we do a very good job in Ohio. And I'm not running to burn down the Secretary of State's office or our local boards of elections. But in any system, there are improvements that you can make. And I want to move to a front-end citizenship check so that only American citizens are able to vote in our elections and register to vote. I want to make sure that we're using paper ballots in every county for every election so that we have an immutable audit trail and that the machines won't be rigged. And I want to go to universal photo ID to make sure that people are who they say they are and are able to vote those registration records, and they can prove that they are that sovereign American citizen.
What do you mean by universal photo ID? Is that one card that everybody would have, or would it still be driver's license, passport?
No, it's not one card. It's whatever the photo ID is that you have. But it means that no matter how you vote, whether it's in person or by mail, that you're sending in your photo ID. You're either showing your photo ID or sending in a copy of your photo ID. We shouldn't have two different ways to run our elections, one in person and one by mail.
Photo ID is a big part of your platform, as you mentioned. Right now there is a joint resolution that would require, or that would put on the ballot, a proposed constitutional amendment to require photo ID for voting in the state of Ohio. You've said that you support that. Why is it necessary, though, to put it in the Constitution?
Because you put the most important things in the Constitution. And this is so important. It's the keystone of the security of the election system. If we don't know that people are who they say they are when they show up, how do we know that they were able to vote that record that was registered? So this is fundamental to us as a society. And people show photo ID for hotels, this, cigarettes to buy cigarettes or to buy beer or to rent a car or to fly on an airplane. They should have the same requirement for security in our election system to determine the future of our country.
Should the amendment also include protections for specific types of identification that can be used when going to vote?
Look, that's a cop-out to vote against the amendment. The General Assembly can take care of the photo ID. I'd be fine if they put in the valid forms of photo ID as it is right now, and put that into the Constitution. The key thing here is that we're putting it into the Ohio Constitution, and the power of that is that only by a vote of the people, once it's adopted, can the people of the state of Ohio remove it from the Ohio Constitution.
You've also been forceful in saying that you believe that ballot boxes should go away. Why? What problem do you have with ballot boxes?
Because they don't solve a problem for election security in the state of Ohio. We don't need them. We have 30 days of early in-person voting. You can walk into any election in any county for 30 days beforehand and give them your ballot. The ballot drop boxes don't address a problem. And at the same time, it prevents you from upholding the law that of the state of Ohio that says that you're not allowed to harvest ballots. And so why would you create a system that literally makes you not be able to enforce the laws of the state of Ohio? Again, my goal is to run the most secure elections in the history of our state, and we only do that by eliminating those ballot drop boxes. And everybody's seen a video online of people stuffing these ballot drop boxes. Maybe not in the state of Ohio, but in other places. And so as you perpetuate this, you're going to have that problem.
That's obviously your stance on the ballot boxes. I also wanted to ask you about just absentee ballots and early in-person voting. Do you believe that those two aspects of the system should stay in place?
I like the absentee ballots. I think they're very important for people that are convalescing or over the age of 65 or first responders or people that have to work. But you got to remember, we've got 30 days of early voting. That's a lot. Matter of fact, that's one of the longest periods in the entire nation. And so people have ample time to vote. I think it's good that people have ample time to vote. I'm fine with that. I wouldn't change any of that. I think it's good for people to show up in person for the in-person voting. And as long as people are sending in a photo ID with their absentee ballots, I support that as well.
The Secretary of State's office recently provided voter registration data to the U.S. Department of Justice as part of a federal review of voter registration records. If you had been Secretary of State at the time, would you have provided that information? And is there any situation where you would defy the federal government in a request for that type of information?
Look, that information is common sense. The federal government are the ones that know who the citizens are. We don't have those records. We don't keep track of the Social Security information for Americans at the state of Ohio. And so we have requirements. By the way, they're federal requirements. The federal government is the one, Congress, that said that you have to be an American citizen to vote in a federal election. So as we're trying to uphold the laws of Congress, the laws of the Constitution of the state of Ohio, we have to have this information. And part of that is sharing our voter files with the federal government and them sharing citizenship data back to us. So yes, I would absolutely support that.
Besides ballot boxes and paper ballots, are there other changes that you would make to the voting system in Ohio? Because we hear all the time how secure, how accurate Ohio already is. The gold standard, as Secretary LaRose puts it.
Well, we talked about photo ID. So first of all, I support sending in a photo ID with your absentee ballot. That's one change that I would make. The second change is I would move to an upfront citizenship check to make sure that people are American citizens when they're registering to vote. The third big change is that I would make sure in the 12 counties that don't have separate paper printed ballots that we're using a paper printed ballot in every county for every election so that you have an immutable audit trail. You can see who you voted for. They tally that up that night, and we can go back and we now have an audit trail. We can fully audit that to make sure that the machines have not been violated through a cybersecurity attack.
I'd like to do a few topics just kind of in a rapid fire way. It doesn't have to be a one-word answer, but your stance briefly on these issues. Same-day voter registration.
I'm against same-day voter registration.
What's the problem with it?
The problem is somebody coming in and creating the record and voting the record immediately. We don't have any sort of a check as to whether or not you're a valid sovereign elector under the laws of the state of Ohio, but your ballot is now lost into the voting system. So no, we shouldn't be doing that.
Universal voting by mail.
Universal voting by mail, I like the structure that we have in the state of Ohio where you have to request an absentee ballot, number one. That's very important. Number two, I prefer to have an excuse-based system as we had in 2005. I think we should encourage more in-person voting. I think that it also helps with our civics for the people of the state of Ohio to see other people participating in the voting process. But you can see that people have faith in our elections, and we do elections right in the state of Ohio because we've had outstanding voter participation in our great state.
Online absentee ballot requests.
I could be okay with that, online absentee ballot requests, but it had to be done the right way.
And finally, Election Day as a state holiday.
I love the idea of Election Day being a state holiday and a national holiday. I'd love to get back to us voting in person, us seeing both people of both parties, but that we want what's best for our country, showing up in person to vote, which is the most secure way to vote, but also the best way for us to share a moment civically with each other about us expressing our opinions as sovereign American people and making sure that the government follows our direction.
Sprague is finishing up his second term as state treasurer. Before this, he served as a state representative. Coming up next on Face the State, the race for governor has picked up another candidate. Heather Hill is back in the race, but this time as a write-in. Why she decided to keep running after a big setback just 2 weeks before the May primary knocked her off the ballot. What did you do today?
Well, we filed to run for governor as write-in candidates for the general election.
A Republican candidate who was disqualified in the May primary is back in the race for governor. Heather Hill filed Wednesday morning with the Secretary of State's office to run as a write-in candidate. She told me she wants to continue the fight, and she's doing it with new Lieutenant Governor running mate Patrick Manley. You may recall Hill was disqualified from the Republican primary when her previous running mate, Stuart Moats, dropped off the ticket a couple weeks before the election. The two had a public falling out on social media. Now she says she's pushing forward after that trying time.
My name is Heather Hill, and I'm here to file paperwork.
Wednesday morning, Heather Hill and her new running mate, Pat Manley, filed paperwork at the Secretary of State's office to run for Ohio governor as write-in candidates. Then they sat down with 10 TV for an exclusive interview. Why have you decided to run as a write-in candidate?
Because we don't give up. We don't give up. We do not fold.
In late April, Secretary of State Frank LaRose disqualified Hill as a candidate 2 weeks before the Republican primary when her former running mate withdrew from the ticket. State law does not allow substitutions within 70 days of a primary unless the candidate has died.
You know, I've went through some really trying times here lately with this campaign, but I feel like anytime there's a door closed, God can open a window. So I'm very excited today.
Vivek Ramaswamy is the official Republican nominee for governor. So Hill is running simply as a write-in candidate, along with Manley, an architect and small business owner. What do you feel you bring to the ticket?
I think what I bring to the ticket is some business background, obviously. You know, that I understand small business quite well.
So what is it that drives you to continue this fight?
What drives me is the fact that I have children and grandchildren in the state of Ohio, and I want Ohio to be a place that we are all proud to call home.
And she seems unfazed by the daunting task of running a write-in campaign against two major party candidates in Ramaswamy and Democrat Dr. Amy Acton. So I have to ask, what are your expectations as a write-in candidate for this? To win, to be competitive, no expectations going in? Where do you stand on that?
My expectation is to win this. I believe 100% that I was put into this race to win.
Dawn Kissick is also running for governor as the Libertarian candidate. As for Hill, she tells me she'll be back out on the road meeting Ohioans where they are. Thank you for joining me this week for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. I'll see you next Sunday at 11:30. Have a great day.